aside from where you're living right now, I know one of the big shifts for you is moving from the kind of that structure of writing for a magazine to doing some
Hmm.
things on your own. And JT and I were chatting a little bit about making that transition. And I know JT has some definitely some questions around that. But I'm curious, like as you started to think about where you wanted to go within your career, how'd you land on this idea? Like, I really want to get more into coaching. I really want to write on my own. I really want to like kind of engage in the more community aspect.
Yeah.
Um,
And
kind of
before
that
you
that
answer,
approach.
it's crazy, I think, to be I'm going to be a freelance journalist and I'm going to write about running. You might as well just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go pro in I don't know, I'm going to be a pro. Whatever. But I love it. You're like, yeah, I can do this.
Well, to answer that question, I've got to rewind to 2009 when I was living in Massachusetts. I was managing full time a specialty running shop called PR Running in
Right.
Westboro, Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And prior to that, I had worked at the sports department of my local newspaper. I was a copy editor. I actually wrote the running column. I continued to write the running column even when I left the newspaper as a staffer and was managing the store. But around 2009, I'd been doing that for about 3 years at that point, meaning managing the store and not really working in media. I wanted to get back into it, and I knew that I wanted to write about running, and I knew that I wanted to coach some more runners because I had been working with 3 to 5 people sort of on the side while I was managing the store, and I wanted to do more of that. So I went to my boss. His name's Rich Allen, owner of PR Running, still owns PR Running, still one of my best friends. He was in my wedding in 2013. I asked him if I could step back from my full time duties at the store to 3 days a week because I knew enough about the landscape that I needed some stability and
Hmm.
predictability in terms of my income. So I asked him if I could step back to working 3 days a week at the store, about 24, 25 hours. That way it would open up time for me to pursue writing and pursue coaching and just put more time into those things. And he was really supportive of it. He kept me on 3 days a week, continued to pay. He used to pay my full health insurance, which was awesome. I was the only full-time employee at the store, and he paid half of it, I think, after that, which was huge because I didn't know what I was going to do in that regard. But I used my time to start just pitching stories to different publications. And at the time, competitor.com and competitor group was just starting to gain momentum, and they launched their running site in 2009. So I got in fairly early there in terms of writing. They also own Triathlete magazine, and I picked up a running column for them called On the Run. I was freelancing for New England Runner, Running Times. I mean, I was able to pick up some work pretty quickly because I had some experience and I had some contacts. And I started coaching a few more athletes, and it was working really well. I was quite happy. I was like, all right, this is good. I got a good mix here. I'm working a few days a week at the store. I've got money coming in, regular schedule, and I kind of control the rest. And it felt like the right balance at the time. I didn't know how I was going to shift it to the point where I wouldn't have to work at the store anymore. I had gone up to Maine and spent a day with Scott Douglas, who is a longtime freelance writer for Running Times, and he's written books and other publications, and asked him basically how he did it. And
How do I become you?
yeah, how do I become you? And I remember him just telling me, he's like, it's not very stable. It doesn't always pay very well. You don't always get paid on time. He's like, best thing you can do as a writer is just like pitch, pitch, pitch. And when you feel like you've pitched your head off, start pitching some more.
Yeah.
And that was like that was some really good advice. But I mean, that's what I did. And I was in a good spot. And right around it was like early 2010, competitor.com hired me for the weekend to work the Boston Marathon for them and write stories. And that was in April. And I think in March, the web editor position at competitor.com opened up. And I'd already been writing for them, and I was aware that it had opened up. And I just knew. I was like, this is my chance. Like the opportunity to get in at a running publication is I mean, the opportunities to do that are few and far between.
Right.
Most of those publications are small. Even Running Times, which was my favorite magazine at the time, none of them were on staff at Rodale. They were all contractors, and there just wasn't a lot of stability. Competitor Group was this new thing, and the web editor position had opened up, and I had been writing for them already. So I threw my name in the hat, and they brought me out for an interview. It was only the second time I'd ever been out to California, first time to San Diego. I was like, well, this isn't so bad. I could totally see myself out here. And I mean, living in Massachusetts, I own my home. At the time, I thought I was going to be there for life. I had it pretty comfortable. But I knew that I mean, from the time that I talked to Rich at the running store, like I knew what I wanted to do was coach runners and write about running. And ultimately, my goal was to do that for myself. But I knew I was at least smart enough to know like how challenging that is, like that it was going to take me a while to get there. I didn't know how long, but I knew that it was just going to take me a while to get there. So I had to be very strategic and methodical in terms of how I approach it. And I also needed experience. I mean, I had worked as a copy editor at a newspaper. I had done freelance stuff for a bunch of publications. I'd coached a few athletes, but I knew that in order to do that successfully on my own, in addition to the right opportunities, I needed more experience. So, I mean, I'll fast forward through a bit, but I got offered the job at Competitor Group to come out and work as the web editor of competitor.com. And I really saw that as a foot in the door. It was full-time, salaried. It was actually less money than I was making in Massachusetts, but it was full-time. It was salaried. The company was fairly new. It had funding behind it. So I knew there was at least a few years of stability there. I didn't know exactly how much, but I knew there was some stability there. Leaving Massachusetts was tough. My dad didn't take that all that well. My girlfriend at the time, who is not my wife now, didn't take that all that well. But I knew it's what I needed to do to get where I wanted to go. And in the course of less than 6 weeks, I packed up my life, sold my house, and moved to California to start working for Competitor. And I was there for 6 years. Gained a lot of experience as an editor, as a writer on the media side of things. I moved up to senior editor by the time that I left. And by the time that I left, Competitor, the running brand, was more cohesive than when I got there. When I got there, they had a digital vertical and a print vertical. And by the time I left, those were merged, and it was just one thing. And we had a good thing going. It's now Podium Runner, and Jonathan Beverly's doing a great job with it. And I started coaching. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. And there's a long story behind that, which we don't have to get into here. But I started coaching more people as well in San Diego. I started coaching a group of women called the Prado Racing Team. I still coach many of them today. So I was gaining experience doing that. I picked up a few more athletes. I was doing that on the side. And it was just like a really, it was a really good blend for me. And I achieved what I had set out to do in terms of gaining experience and then just, developing some stability. And we can get into it if you guys want, but it's gotten me to the point where I am now, where I've been self-employed for the last 4 years as a coach, writer, and now podcast host.
Wow, that's cool. So, I mean, it sounds like all of it, and you're right. You have to go back in time to tell that story. Otherwise, you can't say why you had the confidence to go do that, or why you had the contacts then, and all of those different pieces to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, and it's important to tell that story because I get people reaching out to me every week now. How do I do what you do? And I'm like, well, how long do you have to listen to like what it took? I'm like, it took me, it took me at minimum 6 years, probably closer to 10, to put all the right pieces in place and like gain the experience that I needed to. And, even now I love what I'm doing, and I think I've been fairly successful at it, but it's still not easy. It's still a lot of work, and it's not as glamorous as it seems from the outside, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Mario, one of the interesting things is I think that people assume that as a journalist, you're out to all these wonderful, fantastic races, and you're spending time coaching, you're spending time covering it, you're flying first class, you're doing all these spectacular things. But it's a grind, right? Like it takes away not just your, I would assume just the Monday through Friday, but the real bulk of the work comes on the weekends where if you are doing race coverage or you are coaching, or that's where a big investment at least used to be. And the interesting thing is when if I'm recalling correctly, you were also training down in San Diego, and I think Alan Culpepper was coaching you a little bit too, and so you're
Yep.
getting some information from back then. So you're also competing, you're also living it as well. And I'm kind of curious with all of that, like, where do you find the balance? Where do you find the opportunity to say, like, okay, this is the job, this is me as an athlete, and this is me as an advisor or a coach, and where do you because you're critiquing at different levels. You're
Mm-hmm.
critiquing yourself, you're critiquing someone's workout, and you're critiquing the sport as a whole. And how do you balance all that?
It's an interesting question. The
That's truthfully a first for me, though, that anyone said that. But carry on.
Well, there you go. You can retire now. You've asked your one interesting question
All right, see you
right
guys.
off into the sunset. But I mean, I think it's not balanced. I mean, maybe on the whole, if I were to zoom out and look at it over the course of a long period of time, things probably look a lot more balanced than they are at any given moment. But there have been times when I've been more focused on myself as an athlete, which means I'm less focused on something else. There have been times where I am more focused on my coaching and what my own athletes need, which means I'm less focused on something else. Or there's times when I'm more focused on writing, reporting, covering races, and I'm traveling for long stretches at a time, which means I'm less focused on some of those other things. So in the moment, things are, on any given day, things are completely out of balance and completely out of whack. And my attention is going pretty intently in one place, which means things aren't getting completely neglected, but they're also not getting my full attention either. But again, if you zoom out and you look in the whole, it's like, okay, well, I've probably devoted an equal amount of my time and attention to all of these things. It's just that time and attention has come at different times, if that makes sense. But I mean, running, you guys know better than anyone else, running never stops. I mean, especially in California, there's races year round. Things are always going. There is no real off season, and that can be that can be great, but it can also just be really challenging because it becomes hard to shut off and give yourself that break that you need from time to time in order to recharge and rest. So
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
So Josh asked you the why, or excuse me, Josh asked you the how. How did you become these things and how did you get these things done? I'm curious, like why you knew you wanted to coach runners and you knew you wanted to write about running. It was like that was your focus, and it's still your focus, seemingly, unless you have some other secret plan you're trying to hatch that we don't know about. Maybe we'll get to that later. But why? What do you love about coaching? And what do you is that the same things that you love about writing about running as well?
Yeah, there is a lot of overlap between the two. I mean, on the coaching side of things, it is very personal. It's one-to-one relationships. I work with anywhere between 20 and 25 athletes very closely at any given time throughout the year, and we're in constant communication. I'm writing their schedules. I'm at a lot of their events. I know a lot about them and their lives and the things that they have going on outside of running. I know what place running holds in their life, whether they're a competitive age grouper or a professional athlete, and how everything else in their life supports that or complements it. And I mean, the biggest thing that I want to do with those people is to help them realize their potential and see what's possible for themselves in this pursuit of running that means so much to them. But it's very personal and it's very individual. I do the same thing through my writing and through my podcasting. I try through my work, whether it's sharing the experiences of someone else, whether it's sharing my own experiences as an athlete, or whatever it may be, is to show people what's possible for themselves through the lens of running. But I'm not doing that on a one-on-one individual level. It's much more widespread than that, and it definitely reaches more people, and it's less personal. But I know, for instance, if someone reads something that I've written or listens to an episode of my podcast and they hear my guest telling a story about how they overcame something, they see themselves in that person, and it inspires something in them that they want to pursue or they want to figure out. And in a way, it's it's coaching, it's providing that for people, but it's just less personal than it is when I'm actually working with someone on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
And I think Mario, you bring up, I think, an interesting concept where
Hmm.
there's this idea around, especially now, without races for the masses. I mean, if you were an elite athlete, there's a few here and there, but one of the things is this idea of process versus outcome, and how we sometimes get fixated to an outcome, which honestly, I don't really think that that's a bad thing. I think we can all try to strive towards something, kind of depending on what that outcome is. But right now, there's very little in terms of the way of the outcome. And how do you keep individuals in all lines of your work just committed to the process and enjoying that when it doesn't seem to have these benchmarks of, all right, how am I doing, or end capping a bit of that process?
Yeah, I personally I've been using this time as an opportunity to really hammer that home and reinforce it with people, since there are no outcomes in the form of races in particular, to use one example, that we should be aiming for. Because when there are, like, we talk about process all the time,
Yeah,
but it can be hard to really embrace that when you've got a race that's 6 weeks away.
right.
So I mean, right now, where there are no events to really focus on, I mean, I've always thought of races as, like, I don't look at them as like outcomes or end alls. They're just checkpoints along the way, part of the
Sure.
process. And this is a good time, especially with my athletes on a one-on-one level, to help them to really understand what that means and to help them really realize that. And for some of my athletes, that might mean setting up time trials, because they have the opportunity to train and they can push themselves and see what's possible when no one else is around and there isn't the glitz and glamour of a big event. But there are other athletes that I have who, because of their situation, they're now working from home. Their kids are home all the time. They
Yeah.
have less time than they're used to training. I mean, the thought of doing a time trial is like the last thing that they want to be doing or that they can be doing at this point. So with those athletes, it's focusing on, like, hey, you have limited time, you have a lot of these constraints, you can't put in as much time to training as you typically would, you don't have this big thing that you're working toward, but let's focus on like what you can do, like as little as it may seem to you at the time. Because when things do open back up again, when your schedule allows for you to train a little bit more, when you do have a race that you can get excited about, if you have that mindset going into it, like, hey, I'm just focusing on what I can do and I'm not getting too high or getting too low over anything that may come at me during the course of a given day, that's going to make you a better athlete, down the road. It's going to make you a better person. It's going to help you better handle any number of things that comes at you in life. And I think right now is just a really good time to work on that, because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. Like, we really have to, especially if we're going to be in this for the long haul, or we've accepted that we're going to be in this for like quite a while, you have to develop those processes to get you through to the next day, to
Yeah.
really, like, not get flustered when something doesn't go your way, to not like get overly excited when you see like a small breakthrough, realizing like, hey, I still got to get up and do it again tomorrow. So I don't know if that answers your question, but at least that's the approach that I've been taking from a coaching standpoint.